cleanup here on a Friday afternoon, so I'm going to do my best to keep you guys awake. If I can find my slides, there we go. So, I need to begin with a confession. I believe in science, even though it's not exactly de rigueur on high in this town. High they must be, I think. The kind I'm steeped in is where ecosystem protection meets health. Ironically, though, science has been quite a double-edged sword, allowing amazing quality of life and longevity, new understandings of life and the planet. But modern technologies have also created vexing problems, one of which is that we're all now exposed to an array of man-made, dangerous man-made chemicals in the food we eat, our air and water, the products we use daily, and the built environments that we live, work, learn, and play in. In this country alone, we import or manufacture over 74 million pounds of chemicals and raw materials a day. 80,000 plus chemicals have been registered for use in this country, and yet no more than 1% of those have been tested fully for health effects. Science shows, unfortunately, that these chemicals are detrimental to wildlife and human health, causing cancer and asthma, and increasing risk for other conditions, including metabolic, immune, and neurological impairments. So developmental disabilities and diseases of aging like Parkinson's. Even the tiniest exposures to chemicals that mimic or disrupt our hormones and alter how genes function can basically hijack fetal and early childhood development and literally program us for disease later in life. So trends like these aren't surprising. I'll give you a moment to look at that. This is expensive and sad. A 2008 analysis estimated that environmental contaminant-related problems in the U.S. kids cost $76.6 billion that year, every year. And in 2013, we learned that neurodevelopmental effects of childhood lead exposure, just lead exposure alone, cost $51 billion annually in the United States, despite progress that we've made in lead reduction here. In mid and low-income countries, lead exposure costs almost $1 trillion annually. And that's 7 times the total development aid that we give each year. A soon-to-be released Lancet report, it's a commission that has done this fantastic report you'll see soon on pollution and health, tells us that disease caused by pollution kills 3 times as many people as AIDS, TB, and malaria combined. Some of the chemicals people and wildlife are routinely exposed to can also damage sperm and egg, our very ability to reproduce, which I know all too well. I was raised and later went back to work for 16 years as a tennis coach on the beautiful Hudson River in New York, which had a dirty secret. GE had polluted it. It's well-known history. But also companies adjacent to the tennis courts that I was practiced on and taught on for years were, for decades, actually illegally hiding, burying scads of barrels of PCBs, which are reproductive toxicants and one of the more potent carcinogens known to man. So when later my husband and I experienced unexplained infertility, how could I not wonder if there was a connection, right? But ask health professionals about links between infertility and chemicals, and they're like deer in headlights. Med students just don't get any real training in environmental health. So that's when I knew that somebody had to start demanding answers, and I left my job at Stanford Business School's Social Enterprise program to become a fellow at an environmental health research institute, where I launched a work group, an international work group of scientists and doctors, policy folks and advocates, and then founded 2 grant-making organizations dedicated to reducing disease burdens by reducing toxic chemical pollution. We support leaders looking for practical and regulatory solutions and fund researchers and organizations who excel at translating science for decision makers in public policy and in medicine. The bottom line is that by reducing environmental contributors to disease, we're working on the far vaster efficiency of upstream disease prevention versus treatment. Now, I'm all for treatment, too. But get this, in our country, 2 to 4 cents at best on the dollar invested in dealing with disease is put toward prevention. That's such an inefficiency, it's got to change. If you just think of preventing 10% of diabetes or cancers, I mean, that's hundreds of billions of dollars a year in cost and suffering in the US alone. The good news is that science and health professionals are starting to catch up. It's encouraging that in the last few years, several large and important professional associations of endocrinologists, pediatricians, OB-GYNs, reproductive health researchers have issued landmark public statements addressing the risks of toxic chemical pollution. And just last week, half of all US practitioners, that's 434,000, signed on to a medical consortium warning about the health effects of climate change, most of which derive from air pollution, so all the same bad chemicals I've been talking about. It's encouraging, too, that more and more consumers understand the quandary posed by toxic ingredients in our everyday products. That awareness has led to increasing demand for safer stuff. Market campaigns today help drive that demand and incite expanded screening of supply chains for chemical hazards. These plus state and federal reform efforts translate into multi-million-dollar demand for safer products and chemicals, and corporations and brands are listening. Some are now finally practicing greater transparency around their ingredients. But even with these points of promise, you know what keeps me up at night? It's a really big-ass unintended consequence. Too often, the bad actor chemicals are simply being replaced by something that's just as untested or just as bad. That's called regrettable substitutions, or whack-a-mole. A good example is baby bottles. So many are now marketed as BPA or bisphenol A free. I know you've heard of that chemical. But the BPA is replaced by a small tweak called BPS, and it's just as bad. So we create false confidence in moms buying those bottles. We may not actually be reducing hazardous exposures. In essence, advocates have been successful at creating these toxics restrictions, but the supply of proven safer alternatives lacks way behind, and like Barry's fish. So how does this happen? First, unlike for pharmaceuticals, there's no FDA for chemicals in the United States. So it's kind of a Wild West crapshoot where health and safety are concerned. And corporations can pollute our ecosystems and your bodies with almost no liability for your cancer or your kid's brain tumor. Second, there is no chemistry degree program in the world that requires a single course in toxicology. So chemists don't invent things with endocrine disruption or health as a lens. I'm going to skip this because I'm going to go over too long, but I will say that recently this too is kind of beginning to shift. China and India have become hubs of green chemistry innovation, and there are now 10 or 12 universities in the United States that have established programs in green chemistry to try to promote a fundamental redesign of the way chemists think and design. And we funded wonderful business NGO partnerships that have developed these comprehensive chemicals test protocols and screens and databases. And I love this. Sorry, wrong one. Guess it's not in there. So they've developed this chemical footprint sort of framework that's comparable to the carbon footprint calculators. It's huge. I'm taking huge back. It's a really huge development. What does this add up to? We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. I believe it's simply not conscionable as a funder to continue the grant funding that we have unless we're also putting significant resources into scaling the innovation and commercialization of actually safer alternatives. So Forsythia did a multi-year sort of exploration of how innovation and commercialization in green chemistry happens. I call that benign by design materials. How money flows to that and what our highest leverage strategy to scale that would be. And we are now a solutions-oriented investor, deploying all of our assets, grants, and the investment corpus in integrated ways to advance the mission. We just instigated the launch of SaferMade, which is a new first-of-its-kind venture fund investing in companies that create products and processes that are safer for people and planet. It's an untapped market niche where if you're smart and strategic with your dollars, you can bridge good ideas into a great commercial and environmental success. The market numbers are really impressive. It's like where organics were about 10 or 15 years ago. SaferMade's managing partners are moving right into this financial and impact return opportunity. They're working with leading brands like Patagonia, Levi's, Nike, Method, and others to commercialize the safer solutions that those guys are desperately seeking. And a good example would be stain and water repellents with the companies that sell outdoor clothes, so you don't end up with this crap in your water. And SaferMade's reviewed over 150 startups already in technologies and products and processes across things like apparel, textiles, food systems, electronics, and what we call formulated products, so beauty, care, makeup, that sort of thing. And we as anchor investors view SaferMade as the definition of value investment proposition. It's a cutting-edge way to leverage philanthropy in biodiversity, in environment, in health, in early childhood and education, in sustainable food, agriculture, and commerce as well. It's a starting wave, and if it's successful, we'll accelerate the pipeline of safer ways to make the world go round, and we're going to increase our foundation's grant budget, so win-win. And one day, I hope that the crust of this wave will include, and here I want a drum roll from the moderator to talk about optimism. We'll have less ecosystem pollution, reduced healthcare spending, and a lower U.S. deficit. Thank you.